Hello, everyone, and welcome to End of Life University podcast, where we share real talk about life and death. I'm your host, Dr. Karen Wyatt. Thanks for joining me here for episode number 290. We're getting awfully close to that 300 episode milestone. I'm kind of excited about that. Today, I'll be sharing with you an interview on how to restore joy after loss, and my guest is Lucinda. And I think you'll really enjoy my conversation with her. I've been trying to present some upbeat topics because I feel that we all really need that right now. We're still in the middle of the pandemic, even though there is a light at the end of the tunnel with vaccines that have become available. But we do need to be able to keep going and to finish this out, to see it through and finish strong. And so I'm trying to share with you some positive tools and information that can help you be more resilient as we're going through this process together. And one of the things I wanted to mention, finally, this past week, I was able to host the laughter yoga webinar with Janet Carroll, the laughter nurse. And I've been planning on this for a couple of months. It was scheduled for February, but had to be postponed because Janet lives in Houston, and the week the webinar was supposed to take place was the week of that horrible snowstorm that really paralyzed much of the state of Texas. So Janet was without electricity, internet, heat, and water for multiple days, and there was no way that she could possibly do this webinar. So we moved it to March. But I wanted to say we had such a wonderful time. There were 100 people who attended the webinar, and 12 brave souls volunteered to have their cameras and microphones on while we did all these laughter exercises with Janet, and it was really fun. Before the webinar started, I was tired. I'd worked really hard all day. I just wasn't in the best mood. And after that 1 hour of laughter yoga, literally I floated out of the room. My face was glowing and I felt completely energized. And since the webinar, I've received multiple emails from people telling me the same thing. One woman who said, I'm in the middle of chemotherapy right now, and this laughter yoga made a huge difference to me and how I feel. So I'm telling you about this because even if you didn't register, then you won't have received the replay. But I'm going to post a link to a recording of the webinar on the show notes for this episode. You'll find them at eolupodcast.com, episode number 290. So there's a link to a YouTube video, and just one word of warning, I started the recording a little bit late. So I start in the middle of Janet telling us how laughter yoga actually helped her get through this time when she was freezing in her house with no heat or running water for multiple days. So it starts abruptly in the middle of her describing that, but from then on, the whole webinar is intact, so you can listen to all of that. So again, just come to the show notes if you want to find the link to watch that at any time. And I wanted to remind you of a couple of other things that you can find on the webpage at eolupodcast.com for this podcast. There are some series that I have done in the past that you can find that you might want to listen to. For one thing, I've been doing a monthly vigil for the past year, ever since the pandemic began. Every month on the 9th day of the month, I record a vigil that lasts maybe 15 minutes or so, and it's really a time of contemplation and deep breathing and meditation together. I usually read a poem or some sort of a writing and then reflect a little bit on the lesson that I'm talking about. And many of the vigils have been on grief, different types of grief that we're experiencing, some on anger, on compassion, how to feel connected to other people. So I've also gotten a lot of positive feedback about those vigils. And if you're not aware of them, I will post a link where you can go and find all the previous vigils. Like I said, they're about 15 minutes each. You might want to really participate in the vigil There's always a candle lighting in each vigil, so maybe have a candle with you and a match so that you can light your candle as part of the vigil exercise. There's also a downloadable script. I believe for all of the vigils, at least most of them have a script if you wanted to download it so you can actually read along with me what is being said during the vigil. But I encourage you to actively participate, do the deep breathing, do the meditation and contemplation time, and sit quietly for a while and take it in. I created those for us, for all of us, to help us feel more connected, more grounded, but also to go within and really look at our own pain and work on it, be with our pain and acknowledge it and work through it. So you'll find those, a link to the vigils on the show notes at eolupodcast.com. Then two other things I have in series. One is a series of stories that I've told. Also, each one is around 15, 20 minutes long. The series is called Love Over Fear, Stories for Precarious Times. If you want to go and just listen to me tell some interesting stories. And the other series is called Suicide Surviving the Aftermath. It's an 8-part series that has to do with all of the research I did over the years into my father's life and trying to understand his suicide. So that's the third series that's available if that's of interest to you. So once again, go to eolupodcast.com. You'll find links for all of those there if you're interested in those resources. And who knows, maybe you've been listening for a long time, but you didn't even know that any of those things were available. So I thought I should tell you about them. So with all of that being said, we will move on to my interview with Joy Lucinda. As always, stay tuned after the interview and I'll come back with a few takeaways and to say goodbye. So here we go. Today, I am happy to welcome a very special guest, Joy Lucinda, who has been a healthcare professional serving hospice patients, persons with dementia, and their families for more than 20 years. But she now does coaching and consulting to help others share their unique gifts with the world. Joy is the author of the book, Restore Joy After Loss, Life-Changing Strategies to Function with Joy in Everyday Life in the Midst of Grief, Stress, and Chaos, which is, in my mind, the exact book that we may all need to read right now. And you can learn more about Joy's work at her website, joylucinda.com. So Joy, thank you so much for being here with me today.
I'm truly honored.
I've been looking forward to our conversation because we already spoke once over the phone and we had such a great talk with one another. I've been excited to be able to share it with the audience here. But I was hoping you'd start us off by just tell us a little bit about your story, how initially you worked with hospice patients, and then what inspired you to shift your path a little bit to doing something else now.
Sure. Well, it all started at a very young age. I grew up on a farm in Oklahoma, and I experienced a lot of death with my pets and my animals because they wandered free on the land. And so I had to learn really quickly about death and dying, where most kids are kind of, let's say, sheltered by it. However, when I was in college at Oklahoma State University, I was volunteering with hospice when everyone else was partying. It's just in my heart and soul to work with older people and to work with people who are chronically ill and terminally ill. It was just always something that I resonated with. And it's something that became natural. And if you really think about it, I was always the first intake person into the home, into the crisis, and into the trauma. And what do you need at that moment? Joy. And that's my name. So I found that out like probably 3 years into hospice work. I was like, hey, that's kind of interesting. But people need joy in that moment. They don't need necessarily coddling or, sorrow. They need some joy because that's what brings strength to people. So I found that very interesting. But how it's shifted in the past 10 years is I actually started going into alternative therapies. I hit a wall with hospice where finally about 20 years in, I was like, oh my God, I've reached my grief quotient and it was too much to handle. And so I had to switch gears and I became a reflexologist so I could just hold hands and hold feet and help people feel better. And what it ended up happening is it created a movement of touching each other to heal each other and to heal oneself. And it ended up evolving to the point where I started doing more intuitive work with people, really tapping into people and people on the other side. And I didn't expect this to happen, but it did. And I have had the privilege to help thousands of people to not only get through grief, but just to get through the everyday, what Elizabeth Kubler-Ross calls the everyday little death, like rejection and, your kids going off to college and all these things. I've had the privilege to help thousands of people work through those things because of my hospice experience, but using it from a more soul perspective. And it has been just a miracle that I fell into this because it's so easy and so wonderful to see people wake up after they kind of died to themselves by giving themselves away as well.
I love what you're saying, because I think it's the Buddhists also talk about the little deaths of life, and that the small deaths that we experience, the losses we experience all through life, are really a way of practicing for the ultimate death we will go through. It's just that in our society, none of us take advantage of that and actually practice it. So I'm really happy to hear that you're supporting people and teaching them all along the way how to cope with these losses.
And my other philosophy that I came up with recently, Karen, is you're either living or you're dying. It's a process either way. And so if you're choosing to uplift yourself during chaos and stress, it's a resilience factor, then you're going to be living. And that's what we all want to make a living, do a living, live well. But we're dying when we allow all of these heavy emotions to take over. We need to experience them sometimes, but we can't stay there or our body actually depletes itself. So we have to really look at that choice as a fuel or an empty tank.
Yeah, I like that philosophy as well. I was thinking about your words were reminding me way back many years ago, after the death of my father to suicide, which I've talked about a lot here on this podcast, but I went through a number of years of really heavy grief. And I remember at the time thinking I might never feel joy again. And in my mind, I assumed grief and joy are opposites, and I will not ever feel joy or be joyful until I'm through with the grief, until I'm done with it, not realizing you never actually totally finish with grief. It's something that just becomes part of you. And also not realizing that there is joy within grief. It took me years and years to actually learn about that.
Oh, I'm sure it did because, well, we're taught that for one thing. And the other thing is that we're taught, well, maybe in America, maybe all over the world, I don't know. We were taught that it's mutually exclusive and, like you said, it's extremes. Now, I want to add on to that because one time I heard somebody say, sorrow is not the opposite of joy. Boredom is. So when we get to the point, maybe in our grief or maybe in our lives where we're complacent or in a state of ennui, which is just that underlying where you're just, it's the equivalent of just laying in bed all day, maybe. That is the opposite of joy. And that's when our life force is just kind of drained out because we aren't, like you said, we're not in a state of curiosity or discovery, even in that heavy state, so that we can pull ourselves out.
And it's like our life force, as you were saying, it's being depleted by constantly being in that heavy place.
And well, there's this chart. I don't know if you've ever heard of David R. Hawkins, but he created this chart called the Scale of Consciousness. And I encourage people to look this up. It's nothing really mystical at all. All it is blame's at the bottom, and then love and enlightenment is at the top. And it's an exponential scale. And I use this actually in my book and in my teachings because we are always vacillating through blame and grief and fear and anger. And as you go up, you go into courage, awareness, love, joy, peace. But it's really a great scale for people to look that this is something objective. We're always going back and forth through this. You're talking about, let's see, what were we just talking about? I lost my train of thought.
Oh, kind of how grief depletes our life force energy. And that's one of the reasons we just get exhausted with life.
Oh, yeah. And I was saying boredom and joy. Well, what people don't realize is that joy, because it's at the upper level with enlightenment, which we know that about Buddha and Jesus, Muhammad, God, whatever, joy is in such a high state, it never leaves. And so there's this chart in David's book that actually shows all of those emotional states and the percentage of joy in each one. And I think I do have it in my book. But even in the state of blame and shame, there's 1% grief. And then that percentage of joy goes up as you go into fear, grief, anger, apathy, and it goes up gradually and gradually. And it's so interesting to see an actual objective percentage of the state of joy in ourselves. Now, I like to equate it more like a person, like a shadow. Our shadow is always with us. And joy is the same thing. It's always behind or in front of us, no matter what we're going through. So it's a presence that's always present. And if we can look at it that way, then there's not hopeless. Hopelessness can't exist if joy is present.
I love that. And that's just such an important thought to have right now, where we are in 2021, as we're still in the middle of this pandemic, which we've been dealing with for a year now. And I think people are running out of hope and many people haven't felt joy for the past year and are beginning to look around and wondering, what am I going to do now? And how are we going to get through this?
Well, let me give you an example of, first of all, yes, people are just afraid, but they also have chosen to stay in fear. And we always have a choice. But one thing I did over the course of this is I started putting out how to get through grief in the midst of COVID and all that stuff. But then I was like, you know what? What we're missing is laughter. So what I did is I put together this series called The Vacation from Seriousness, because that's what's happening. People are getting way too serious, way too rigid, way too scared. And so I put together this kind of really humorous thing, like how to use your eye language since you're wearing a mask. And, and I put out videos about how to make a paper balloon, and then you blow it up and then you throw it in the air. And all of these things I even have a calm protocol about how to get your thoughts together and bring you back into center. But I made it more humorous. And just one example is that it's so simple to take our body from a heavy, tense fear state to a very light love state. And one example of this is simply putting your eyes up in the air and looking at the ceiling. When you do that, all of the fears in your frontal lobe of your brain resets. And then you're in a state of neutral, which is safe. And that's how we want to feel. Another thing you can do is simply put your arms up like cheerleaders do the victory thing. And what that does is that actually opens up your breath and your heart chakra, and you cannot be in fear when your arms are up in the air. And what you're doing is you're giving all your emotional baggage up. You're giving up, but in a good way. So there's all these strategies that take seconds to minutes, Karen, to absolutely reset us without having to figure it out. The thing about this COVID situation is that everyone's trying to figure out what the truth is. That's almost an impossible thing to do. And that's a lot of responsibility and burden to put on oneself. The people that are dealing with the disease are dealing with it. But all we can do is look at ourselves. Do I feel heavy or do I feel light? Am I going to choose to feel light? Look up in the air, lift your arms up, or put your arms behind your back when you're sitting down, and you will get in a neutral state where you can make better decisions for you first, then your family, and let everyone else take care of everyone else. It's inward now, and we're not talking about this.
Oh, that's such a good point. That in fact, people have argued back and forth about all the external information that's out there around COVID, when what we really should be focusing on is just how am I doing internally and how can I take better care of myself and keep myself in a healthier state.
Yes. And I think people get stressed out when they think of self care because in America, selfish is a dirty word. And I'm trying to change that paradigm with my clients and my family and myself. And when people say, you're being selfish, I say, thank you. And it might
Yeah.
be insulting to some people, but the thing is, if I am steady, then the people outside of me, you know how it is, Karen. I mean, you're spiritual as well. It's people, uh, the resonance of me. I am responsible for my resonance. And if my resonance is good and light, the people that are around me are going to feel the goodness and lightness. Whether they receive it or not is different. So if we can look at it that way versus, oh, self-care, gosh, I have to go, I have to go get all this stuff to do my nails and all this stuff. No, you just have to be still and be in neutral.
Hmm. Oh, I really love that. And I love the emphasis that it's so simple. It's actually so simple to get yourself there. And
Simple.
all you need is yourself. All you need
Mhm.
is what you already have.
However, a lot of people have, it's easier to look outside than in the mirror. And that's the kind of clients I work with all the time. They're so busy helping everyone else, but what they don't realize is that they can help more people if they, that's what I've done in my career, which I feel blessed that I've done this, is that making sure that I experiment within myself because I'm weak. I go through grief. I go through stress like everyone else, but I test these things out on myself and then I share it. And then I'm always one step ahead of my clients and then they start doing it and then they move forward. And then I learn new things as more turmoil comes up. Stress is always going to come up, but how can we build that foundation versus just being in crisis mode when it happens?
Yes, yes, I love that. And I think that sometimes we may be a little bit spoiled in our society because we may actually think that it's possible to eliminate stress or that, gosh, it isn't fair. Why should I have to go through stress? Why should I have to have
Mhm.
trauma in my life? Because we don't even recognize how much difficulties are just part of life that's just built in to how life
Mhm.
is. Part of our maturing as spiritual beings is figuring out how do you negotiate the difficulties and still have a good life and enjoy your life here.
It's so true. And I have a really good example of that. I don't know if you've read the book, The Untethered Soul by Michael Singer.
No.
Okay, it's a really good book. And one of the best parts of it is he talks about there's this annoying roommate in our brain. And then there's who we really are, which is the observer of the annoying roommate. So what happens? That annoying roommate is just the voice in our head that's always saying, "Yeah, what's your problem? You shouldn't have done that to that person." And it's at 3 a.m. in the morning when you're, when you're going, "Oh yeah, like I was fine until that." So the annoying roommate is always vacillating. It's always changing his mind. It's always like upset. It's always trying to steer, and it's just the ego, right? But
Mhm.
we are not that voice. And if we had a roommate that was literally like the voice in our head, we would kick him out, right? So
So true.
anyway, but if we can get back to the point where we're the observer. So I'm going through a divorce right now, and it's really a lot. It's a big loss, a lot of trauma with it. So what I've been doing is I've been feeling the pain, which is what the annoying roommate is telling me is going on, all the drama. And then I actually visualize me standing there looking at that. And when I've done that, I'm still feeling that grief and I might be crying or I might be mad, but there's solidarity there. And so that's, I think, a good way to balance out trauma with this situation. At least that's worked for me, but it's still painful.
Yeah. Yeah. And we can't expect that it's not going to be painful. Of
Hmm.
course it is. life is it's going to take a lot from us, and we're going to have to give a lot to life, and especially if we want to keep growing. But having tools like you're talking about is one of the best ways for us to get through it with a little bit less damage, I guess, to ourselves.
That's a good way to put it. Yes. And less of the cat of nine tails that we do to ourselves, whipping ourselves for not being good enough or not getting through it the way people tell us. One of the things I've found that's really helpful for me and for my clients is if you can just say, I forgive myself, you don't have to have a reason. You don't have to agree that you need to forgive yourself. But if you say that, it is like the scale of consciousness we talk about. It is a higher vibration than blame. Blame is the bottom of the barrel. So if you can just say, I forgive myself, your body lightens up and your brain goes into future mode to find solutions based on that.
Wow.
And it's so people like so many are like, oh, I don't want to forgive him. I don't want to forgive him at all. Well, you don't have to. It's just about when you say that, your whole body and mind and spirit shift up into a godlike state so that you can have clarity on what's really best for you selfishly. It goes back to that. And again, 2 seconds. And it's not about it. So how often are we over analyzing everything when really it's just, do I want to feel better or not? I forgive myself. And then I feel lighter and take a breath. But a lot of people aren't willing to do that. It seems too easy.
I really like that. And I'm just thinking about some of the attitudes I think that we're raised with. And one is that we shouldn't forgive ourselves. We should punish ourselves somehow, or we should make amends if we ever do anything wrong. And I'm just remembering myself a few days ago, I was wearing AirPods, the wireless earbuds that my kids gave to me for Christmas outside while I was going for a walk in the snow. And one of them fell out of my ear and landed in a snowbank. And I literally spent 4 hours that day going through the snowbank trying to find the AirPod because I was punishing myself for losing a gift that someone gave to me. I was just thinking, oh man, if I could have just said, I forgive myself, I could have saved myself 4 hours perhaps.
Yeah.
Because I never found it.
I know, but that's a perfect example of what we do. We just get neurotic over these belief systems when really it's about, how long did it take you to finally say, I could just go buy my own, but we all do that. We're neurotic.
Yeah. Looking back on it, it was kind of insane, but in my mind, I thought, I know it's here. So I know I can find it and I have to, because that's the only way I can make up for doing something stupid. I have to make it better by finding it.
Yeah, I've been there.
Well, I was reading in what you sent me about finding calm, and there were 4 R's that you went through. I was wondering if you would talk about those, the 4 R's.
Sure. Well, it's real. A lot of people might be surprised by the first one, but let me tell people the 4 R's. I also have an acronym for calm, but maybe that's for another discussion. But rest, retreat, rediscover, restore. So it's interesting because as I tune into my body and my energy and just meditate as little as I do, rest has been coming up for years as my answer. So I want to give people a tool that's really interesting that might help them through the COVID situation or just stress and chaos, grief, fear in general. And I don't know if you've heard about this, Karen, but have you ever heard of therapeutic left-handed writing?
Oh, yes, I have.
Okay. It's a very powerful tool. So what I tell some people to do is that you open up your journal or your notebook, and on the right side, you just ask the question, how do I stop being scared about COVID, for example? And then with your right hand, you just start writing whatever pops into your head. And on the left side of the page, you ask yourself the same question in your head, then you use your left hand. And most people are right-handed, so it works. But you may find it's messy. You may find you're judgmental. but the answers turn into something much more simple. The right side is like the logical brain kind of coming out, but it has good solutions. The left side is usually one word at a time. And so if people do that and just don't think they write before they think, it says things like be quiet, sit down, go to the next step. And it's very, very gentle. And that's what our soul actually sounds like. Or if people believe in the Holy Spirit, it's usually these simple messages of love, where the other side is like a whole essay. So that's a good tool for people to use. But I've been getting this word rest over and over and over for the past few years. And I was like, I don't want to rest. I want to move forward. I want to be ambitious. I'm an Aries, for God's sakes, right?
Yeah, me too.
So anyway,
I'm an Aries too.
Oh, you are too.
Yeah,
So you can relate.
I know.
Yeah. So it's like we're those determined, fiery people. And so I was like, rest? What are you talking about? But I finally embraced it. And so I have, just real quick, I'll get back to the other, where there's a lot of R's, but I'm going to get back to the other ones because I want to talk about the acronym for REST. And I think it'll really help. We've already kind of alluded to some of it, but I think it'll help people. So the first letter in REST is R, which is release resistance. So I already mentioned this, but basically our body tightens up when we're in fear, blame, grief, anger, apathy, those kinds of emotions. And if we're resistant, so I'm a reflexologist by trade. So if you're resistant, that means you're either tense or in pain. And it might be emotional tension and emotional pain too. They're both kind of simultaneous with the body. So releasing resistance is simply the exercises we already talked about, but it's about allowing yourself to, like I said, forgive yourself, things like that. E in the REST protocol is ease into neutral. If you think about a car, when you put it, let's say you're in you just went down a hill and you have to go up a steep hill. If your car is in neutral, it's not going to go anywhere. It's just going to stay in the middle. And so sometimes we just need to do that, where sometimes we don't need to reverse, which is going back into the past, and we don't need to go into the future yet. Sometimes we just need to sit still without judgment. And I think judgment is I think it's a bigger pandemic than COVID. Self-judgment is such an issue. And so there are times we just have to sit with it and accept what is and be just not care. It's almost like just being in a state of non-judgment. S is stop overthinking. This to me is another pandemic that doesn't get talked about enough. Being a clairvoyant, where I can see metaphors and pictures, I actually see people's emotional baggage, and it looks like it looks like a garbage pit. It looks like a dump. It looks like all of these things, like the car payment and the house payment and kids and the 10 people in high school. There may be 50, but the 10 people in high school that hated them. And I see people, I see things going on. I see guilt. I see all of these things, and people carry that around. And one of the ways to stop overthinking is some of the exercise I already mentioned. But also stopping overthinking is simply to ask the question, what else is possible now? And then your brain only focuses on the bullet points of the near future. It's really amazing. It's kind of like a neutral phase. And then test drive new words is the T in REST. It's about changing our dialogue. So often I hear, especially women, but different people too, men, how often do you hear people say, I'm trying to, or I should do, or I should be, or I think I know? And those are very weak words. Those are words that take you nowhere. They're absolutely insubstantial. They don't have any density. But the opposite of that is do, be, and know. So it's about, instead of saying, I should go take care of let's say my mother right now that I'm taking care of. And then you just say, I am too tired right now. I'm going to take a nap. So the first one is just like air. The second one is solid. And so people don't use strong words. The other kinds of words that people don't use are words like exuberant and extraordinary and blissful and victory and amazing and awesome. Even if you do not feel that way, if you say words like that that have power to them, it changes your whole physiology and the way your brain is thinking. So if someone says, "How are you?" even if you feel like crap and you say, "I'm extraordinarily exuberant today," you're going to see their face and you're going to smile like you just did. So use power words as well, words that are not the norm, like "I'm fine," and then you put your eyes down. Say something that makes you kind of giggle, that brings you up a notch. So that's just a small example of how we can rest, release resistance in the body and mind, ease into neutral, stop overthinking, and test drive new words. So yeah, and it's not a typical protocol, but it really works. Mind is everything to get our bodies to calm down.
Yeah, so true. And I do think in our society, I think for most of us, rest sounds like laziness. I think
Yes.
that we're really geared to think that way, that, well, I shouldn't rest until I've finished all the work that I have to do, and it would be wrong to rest now. So that's a really good point you're making, that maybe that's primarily what we're meant to do. And maybe that's one of the gifts of the pandemic in a way. It's giving us more opportunities to rest.
Yeah, it really has. The other thing I want to mention is, I mentioned the 4 R's. The next was retreat. Sometimes we just don't give ourselves permission to simply step away from situations that aren't good for us. And it might be just leaving the house for 5 minutes and going out in the yard, or it might be that, so it's either the step away or the fall away. So either you can step away from something that makes you feel heavy, whether it's temporary or it's permanent, or you can let certain people fall away as you evolve. So if I'm sure everyone listening today has experienced this, where, you've had a friend for 10 years and then all of a sudden, they're just not around, or they're not available to you, or they're not present. It could just be that you have evolved past that person and they haven't grown with you. So there's no guilt or shame in that. So there's really important to retreat from your life times, and maybe literally go to a retreat, but retreat from your life so you can see what you need to step away from and have clarity in that, or to really have clarity about why certain people fell away, and it really had nothing to do with you at all. And you can celebrate the fact that you've evolved past that. So I don't think people think of that very often either, because it's a very hard thing to think about, that people have gotten out of our lives, but it opens space for other people to fill in that gap. And so many people hold on to things that really aren't in their highest good. And I think people need to realize that this is a completely normal thing to happen.
That's such a good point. And I think I like this idea of retreating or moving away a little bit, because of the fact that oftentimes when we're in the midst of an issue or a problem, we can't really see it clearly for what it is. We can't observe it very well. But just taking a step back and separating ourselves from it a little bit can help us find so much clarity.
And because we're not distracted by those that we're caring about, and it's that it's only in, kind of like Brene Brown talks about, it's only in vulnerability where we have our 20/20 glasses on, right? And maybe the year, but I mean the glasses prescription. But yeah, that's the best time. And you may know this, but it's called creative hopelessness. It's when you're laying at the bottom of the cliff, wondering how you got down there, and you're looking up at the sky, kind of like the Coyote Roadrunner cartoons where the coyote always falls. So you're at that thing, but creative hopelessness means you can't go any lower. So creativity is the thing that is the hopeful point that happens where, well, I have to be creative now. I need to get up and figure this out so I can get out. So, yeah.
I like that.
Yeah, I know. I love that. I do like the resilience of the coyote, though. He never gives up.
It's true. It's true.
So sometimes I'll imagine myself when I'm going through a hard time, like the coyote where he just jumped off the cliff, but he hasn't fallen yet. And there's always about 5 seconds on the cartoon.
Yeah.
So, but that's what I'm talking about. That's that vulnerable moment where everything is completely clear. So if people can kind of laugh and envision it that way, it's like, okay, I have a choice to really make a better decision right now than what I just did.
I like that. That's a good image. After retreat is rediscover.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So I have friends who do energy work on me and confidants I have, and often they're saying you need to really go back to a point in your life when you were super happy. And every time people tell me that, it's my 11-year-old self. And so the 11-year-old self was the one that grew up on the farm in Oklahoma, had a pack of dogs behind me all the time in the pasture. I mean, we had a blast. So I would ride horses with my friends, and it was just freedom. It was the epitome of freedom, seeing the stars at night, whatever. So rediscovering is simply kind of that. It's imagining yourself without the burdens of what is drawing you down, what is depleting you, what are you resisting when really if we're doing the things that are best for ourselves, it's a smooth road for the most part. So rediscovering is going back to that phase. It might be an inner child thing, or it might be that time that the happiest part of your life in general. Now, it's interesting because as a medium, I actually, whenever I tap into people on the other side, more often than not, they're the age of when they were happiest. And I validate this with the family. Was this guy happy at 32? Because he's 32 and he's living here. And they're like, yeah, he was super happy then. Or it might be they're 16. Or so it's really interesting on a soul level that they have an age. So that's one way to kind of rediscover yourself before you let society or maybe the traumas and the grief processes over time and the losses weigh you down. I had several years of my life where I let my losses really weigh me down, and I was really depressed. And I rediscovered the time back in my 20s when I was in grad school living in Salt Lake City. You also went to the same medical school. And it's just like, it's a good way to get back to that. So it's rediscovering that part of yourself before you succumb to all the titles and roles and the expectations that go along with them that really do not custom fit, that do not fit everybody. So that's kind of what rediscovering is about.
Yeah, I like that. I like throwing off all of those maybe false identities too that you've taken on that don't necessarily fit you anymore.
Yeah. And when we do that, we're in a state of purpose at that point, of heart purpose. That's what happens when you release it. So purpose is not skill sets and titles. Purpose is meaning and a bright future. And it's bringing the meaning. I guess rediscover can also be considered bringing meaningful back into life. So recently, I encourage people to do this recently because I just moved here. So I'm really took about a month just to kind of contemplate life. And one day I said, what's meaningful to me? Or does life really mean anything? I was asking all these philosophical questions. So I wrote a list of things that are meaningful. I just wrote, what is meaningful across the top? I was really surprised what came out, Karen, because it wasn't what you would think. When we're in the job and we're setting goals and we're using our skill sets, meaningful might be money, time, trips, boats. There's nothing wrong with all of those. What came out on my list, which I was really surprised, was I love right turns. I love what is it called? Dark sipping chocolate. I like to listen to the willows in summertime at night in Oklahoma, sunsets. It was, my favorite slushie. It was things that don't seem important in our world, but obviously they have a deep meaning for me. So if people make that list, they may be surprised that the things they're prioritizing are actually things that are not meaningful to them.
So true that oftentimes it's those little mundane things or seemingly mundane things that actually mean the most to us, and we overlook them all the time.
We overlook and we bury them somewhere inside. But those are the things I mentioned giggling earlier. Those are the things that kind of make us giggle, you know?
Hmm.
But it's the things that come from the heart and soul. And in order to maintain a facade or really adapt to other people or coddle other people or keep the peace, we go back into that other state, which is really not meaningful. But that's a question to ask for the listeners to really think about. What is really meaningful for me? And that's all that matters. Well, maybe not all that matters, but it's a step in the right direction to, again, get the body, mind, and spirit aligned into neutrality or awareness or acceptance. And then you can balance both sides of the coin, the practical and the purpose.
And so maybe during this time of COVID, when we're more restricted in what we're able to do, just because of business closures or being in quarantine or whatever, it helps us look at where am I right now and what is meaningful to me in the situation that I'm in right now, to make sure we don't keep thinking that I've lost all the meaning, all the things I care about, I can't do, I don't have anything, but recognizing that a lot of times meaningful things are just the little day-to-day things right here in our own homes that we carry out.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think that you said it really, really well. However, there's also, I think, a paradigm that I think a lot of people have started to embrace that, you know what? I'm not powerless here. It was very interesting. The whole reason I'm in New Mexico now is because in March of last year, my clientele went off the rails for 6 weeks, and so I would just get on networking meetings online, and through doing this, I met people who have literally changed my life. We were all in this mode, like, it's not working the same way it was. So we would talk about innovating and shifting and getting out of the box. And we all met together to do this. I am in New Mexico because I met these visionaries and got into this global organization called Global One. It's a humanitarian organization that allowed my purpose and dream I've had for 12 years, is sitting on the sidelines while I had the skill sets and the titles that turned into something else. And so I think if people would look at it, this is my chance to actually create something new that I've always wanted to do instead of waiting for the world to be ready. And I have met so many people that have had startups. They're really successful. They're doing great. And so I guess my point is, enough of the excuses, people. Kind of, get off the chair. Find something that's purposeful, that really aligns with you, and find a way to do it. And some people are like, well, I want to go visit old people and I can't. They're all in the nursing homes. Well, how do you find a solution where you can start it, at least plant a little seed? And that's what I did starting last March. I started planting these seeds, and I shifted so quickly during this time when a lot of people are thinking nothing can happen. And it's absolutely changed my life, where I'm on a completely different trajectory. So I want to encourage people in that.
Yeah, it's so important to be able to see the opportunities that are there around us. They may be slightly hidden. We just have to look a little bit.
And I think it's important to bring up the fourth R, which is restore, because that's it's the same paradigm, but it's a metaphor. So if you were to, let's say you live in an old house and you're restoring your house, essentially what happens with these historical homes is they keep, like, I can't remember what they're called, but the things around the archways in the house, the doorways, I don't know any of the terminology, but you keep the structure of the house. And that is how your body, mind, and spirit are. We're going to keep the structure of who you are at your core values. We're going to keep, your experiences and all the things you've learned from in life. But what we're going to do is we're going to revamp it so it's livable, because the person who started getting really worried or depressed or started giving themselves away to others and not taking care of themselves, that's going to be kind of taken out and gutted. And then we're going to restore it with ways where you can take care of yourself. We're going to put a new wall in where you can, you know, uh, treat other people differently, have people in your life that build you up. And then all of these things become a beautiful house with the exact same structure of the old. So I want people to know that there is a way to restore. And this is also a way to restore your joy, is to take those small steps. And if you think of restoring a house, if you've ever known anyone who's redone their kitchen or something, they had to be very innovative in how they cook. They had to use a hot plate in the living room, or maybe the fireplace, or, or the refrigerator was out, so they had to use ice chests. So that's kind of how life is it's restoring. You're going to be doing things that are uncomfortable and that put you out of the box, just like COVID has done. But that by the time it's done, it's going to be worth it. But people, I think, that are stuck just aren't willing to start something. They think they have to reach the end game before they start. So if they look at it like restoring a house, it helps to cement the process, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I really like that. And it makes me think of like restorative healing or
Oh, yeah.
restorative justice, even, where the idea is not that you destroy what was damaged or what wasn't working before, but just as you're saying, you work with the strengths of what you have, the foundation and the strengths of what you have, and you rebuild upon that foundation to make something even better.
Yes, exactly. And yeah, it's good to put it in those terms. And, restorative therapy, I mean, for rehab as well, it's a gradual process. Like if someone has a stroke, which we've seen many times or whatever, then, the other thing to look at it that way is, let's say, the example of a stroke. They may have been in rehab for 6 weeks and now they can walk 10 feet instead of 1 foot. Do you think that person is really grateful for 10 feet of walking? I would say so.
Mhm.
So this is a chance for you to find, for people listening, and tell others, this is your chance to find gratitude in those small steps, because even if you look back that 10 feet, you're like, wow, I can't believe I've made it this far. Where before the stroke, they would have been taking it all for granted.
So, one of the other concepts that I know you write about that I wanted to talk about is embracing change, because I think that's one of the things we're being forced to look at right now because of COVID, that it's finally dawned on us that we're not just going to go back to the way everything was before COVID ever arrived, that change is happening before our eyes, and things are different now and they'll continue to be different. So do you have thoughts about how can we do a better job right now of embracing change where we are?
Well, I have to laugh about embracing change a little bit, because even if we resist change, there's still change. So I think it's a little funny in a way, but we do have to embrace the differences, especially in the pandemic has really challenged a lot of people. So I don't want to discount that. But what I I actually, well, it depends on the situation, but I feel like I'm very much the kind of person, I like what we consider change. I like things to change on a regular basis. I get bored easily. So for me, I always say, well, I like change unless I don't like it, right? But one of the things I want to tell people about to embrace change is to actually tap into your future self. And people may be saying, what does that mean? But I'll give an example. So it was back in 2007. I had just moved to Chicago, and my boyfriend at the time was there. We ended up getting married and having a child. And but I was really discouraged. I did not like Chicago. It didn't resonate. And so this personal coach I had said, we're going to look at you 20 years from now and tell me what you want. And I told her, I said, I drew a cabin and I said, I'm going to be on a ranch in New Mexico or Arizona. And I see myself there. And what I did is I actually sat down as a 34-year-old with my 54-year-old self. And I was talking to her. She looked looked happy. She was content, and she was telling me this thing. We were sitting in her cabin and all of this. Okay. Fast forward to now. That situation, because I was resisting the change I made in Chicago, and I decided to be unhappy, and I decided to be discontent because it didn't resonate, because I was used to being a free spirit. And it wasn't anyone's fault but mine. So fast forward now, because I did that, that vision of that future self 20 years later really stuck in my head. And because I actually embraced the change, like I mentioned earlier, for COVID, I am actually now in New Mexico looking at ranch land for that cabin that I envisioned when I was 34. And the concept that I had written already has evolved beyond what I had written, and it's called a ranch. And that's a whole other discussion. But I just want to tell people, if you can envision, if you can be best friends with that person 5 years from now or 1 year from now about what they've been through, if they're able to look at it that way, it's a really good therapeutic exercise. But the other thing I think we need to realize is that change to some people means grief, because maybe their loved one died during COVID and they'll never get over that. And so embracing change is not as easy in that situation. And that's where we just would have to talk a whole other discussion about getting through grief and loss and all of those things. But we need to acknowledge that as well.
Yeah, it's so important that we have compassion for ourselves and for other people, for the grief that we're all experiencing now, our own personal grief, and even the collective grief of our society, our whole planet, really.
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly. But again, the whole point of this discussion was the fact that joy is present no matter what. It's always present. It is a state of being that is so full of love that we can't run away from it. And sometimes we always are, I think we tend to escape from things that make us feel uncomfortable, like change. But here's the opposite. Instead of escaping from what you're scared of, what are you pursuing that fits your soul? And I will say that's what I'm doing right now. I am actually pursuing instead of escaping. And for the longest time, I wanted to escape Chicago, for example. But when I decided, oh no, I'm going to pursue this purpose, this meaningful, bright future, which I'm starting to do with this elder initiative I'm putting together for them as well, it's a whole different process. So are you escaping from fear? Are you pursuing who you really are, even during or after the COVID? That's, I think, the rhetorical questions that people maybe really should ponder right now.
Mm. Yeah, I like that. I like the difference in escaping seems more passive, and moving forward and embracing where you're going seems a little more active and proactive.
And it's also heart driven, where escaping is ego driven and neurotic. Yeah. So, and what you said is very valid as well, but it's very important that we look at it that way, because I went through that neurotic stage in many parts of my life, so yeah. But one more thing I would just want to bring in, because I know we have like 1 minute, is that surrender. One of the best ways to embrace change is to simply surrender. And that people may feel weak if they have to surrender, but it's not, because surrender is what I said earlier, where you lift your arms above your head and you take that emotional baggage and you give it up to God. That's what surrender is. And if you think of the word surrender and imagine what it looks like, the middle 3 letters of surrender is end. So if you're in a state where you're finally have had it with COVID, you've had it with everything, then if you surrender, it's the end of this chapter. And then you can ask yourself in your brain, what else is possible now? The brain gives you bullet points of the future based on your calm self. And then you have ended that chapter and you're ready to start a new one with new eyes, new experiences. So yeah, I encourage people to really, kind of take that in, that surrender is not weakness. It's actually allowing yourself to be lighter so you can move into something better.
And maybe experience more joy in the process. As I was thinking, I don't know if this rings true for you, but does it seem like we may need permission to feel joy because in our society, once again, are we kind of told that, well, when bad things are happening, you shouldn't be joyful. You shouldn't feel joy. That would be wrong. And so can we just give everyone permission? It's okay to be joyful during everything that we're going through.
I agree with you 100%. My thought was, at a funeral, you're not supposed to laugh. And I think people are feeling like that in an overarching way right now. But yes, we do need to give ourselves permission it's okay to be light. And it's okay to let go of that need to hold it together, just like we would at a funeral. We're not in a funeral situation. Well, some people are, but if you're listening to this right now, this is the state where just allow yourself to feel what you feel, but allow yourself to be happy. I mean, here's the deal. People don't set a goal of happiness necessarily or ease. So set a goal of ease, set a goal of happiness, set a goal of accepting that joy is okay, and then see what happens. And if you don't like it, go back. Just try it.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. It makes me feel lighter already because, I'll admit almost every day there will be a time when I just feel this weight and heaviness descending upon me. And it's partly overthinking, like you were saying, just getting lost in, when is this going to happen? What about that? What if the vaccine doesn't work? What if, thinking all these thoughts and feeling the heaviness weigh down upon me. And that's a terrible way to live. It's a terrible way to go through each day. And so I've been working at how do I get myself out of it when that heaviness comes? Because I realize that's probably normal to feel it at times. And so I like that idea of setting an intention to just find happiness and joy wherever I can, because it's always with me. It's always here.
Exactly. I'll leave you with one story. So I visited so many hospice patients as you have, and I was out in the middle of the desert in Arizona and visiting this family. And I remember they were telling me the most sad story about their mom, and we were all crying. And then I looked over and I saw this picture of their pug with sunglasses and a hat on. And all of a sudden I started hysterically crying to hysterically laughing at this pug. And then they started laughing, and we were laughing so hard. But then was so cathartic. And it was 12 years ago, but to this day, I still remember it because it was that whole thing about, it's so important that we get to the point where, it really is, even if we fake laugh or even if we fake smile, there've been research showing that it actually lifts our mood and lifts us out of despair. So people can just do something like that, even if they're not ready for it, and just allow themselves to. But it really helped the process of them accepting that hospice is necessary for their mom. And it was just it was natural. I mean, it's human nature to want to laugh.
Yes, absolutely.
And so, yeah.
I wanted to ask you before we run out of time, Joy, if someone listening wanted to work with you, are you available? Are you doing consultations and coaching right now?
Oh, yes. I've been fortunate throughout COVID, except for that initial 6 weeks, to be working. And I do virtual sessions. So even though I'm in New Mexico, I actually have clients around the world who call me for loss, grief. I always meet people usually when they're going through a trauma, loss, or grief. But I have clients for years that keep working with me because life always is throwing things into the basket, So yes. So if you need joy in your life, give me a call, because no matter what you're going through, we can get through it. And it's really, so I'm available virtually. I usually just do it over the phone and then give people the audio of the program, and then they can ponder it. Of the session. But the other thing is I work with individuals, but I also work with entire families who are going through grief, trauma, loss, maybe chronic terminal illness, caregivers, fetal alcohol syndrome. kids with chronic illness. I work with entire families together and separately as well. And that has been an extraordinary experience. I'm getting ready to put some new videos on my website about some testimonials, but I feel honored to be a conduit for this. So so I'm available.
All right. And what's the best way for someone to get in touch with you? Is it through your website?
Well, they can look at my website, which is as of February, it's in transition. But the best way to get a hold of me is to email me at info@joylucinda.com.
All right. I can put that in the show notes.
Yes. And then in the show notes, you can also just put my phone number. And a lot of people will just text and say, hey, are you available? I heard about you from a friend. And so I just very organically is fine.
Okay. And then your book, Restore Joy After Loss. Where can people get a hold of that book?
It is on Amazon. And if you just type in Restore Joy After Loss, they can order the Kindle or the paperback version. The one reason I would recommend the paperback version is because I set an intention when I wrote it that you open the book to wherever you open it to, and that's exactly what you need. So but either way, it'll give you some tips, tricks, like we talked about today, that take seconds to minutes that will bring you back to a neutral state so you can really jump into what really matters in life.
I love that. Well, Joy, I feel like this is exactly what so many of us are needing right now. And that's why I wanted to interview you and share your wisdom with everyone so that, we're all just in it to help each other, to keep each other going and to get through this together. So Thank you. Thanks so much for sharing with me today.
Well, I really feel grateful that you had me on, and I'm really grateful to be in your presence because of all that you've done. So anyway, thank you so much.
You're welcome, and good luck with all your future endeavors.
Okay. Thank you so much.
All right.
Talk to you soon.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Joy Lucinda and found for yourself a lot of tools that might be helpful for you. She was just really full of lots of great information. And as you probably heard me say during the interview, one of the things that really made an impact on me was her suggestion of simply saying once a day, maybe at the end of the day, I forgive myself. And that is something that never dawned on me before. And to be honest, I have probably downplayed the importance of self-forgiveness in my own life, even though, Lord knows I've held on to many, many bad feelings about myself that I need to forgive myself for. But those simple words, I forgive myself, it's really powerful, and I've been using that a lot ever since this interview took place because it really helps me. Even, if it's a day when I did something silly, like I dropped a glass and broke it, but I might kind of have a bad or embarrassed feeling about having done that, about having been so clumsy throughout the day. And when I can stop for just a second and say, hey, I forgive myself, it really lifts the load. And maybe, another time saying something stupid, which I do from time to time, saying things, oh, I wish I hadn't said it that way, or like, that was really dumb. Why did I say that to that particular person? But being able to forgive myself for little gaffes and mistakes and errors and the small things that happen every single day. And then also to begin to chip away at some of the self-loathing that's there for the really big things that have happened in the past, even things that happened many, many years ago. So I was really shocked. I didn't expect that simply saying I forgive myself would make a difference, but I have found it to be really helpful over these last few weeks. So I just wanted to mention that and remind you of that, because I suspect probably all of us could use a little more work on self-forgiveness. So that is it for today. I hope you have enjoyed this episode, and I hope you'll come back next week. Next Monday, there'll be a brand new episode and an interview that I'll share with you. If you like this content, please consider sharing it with other people, rating and reviewing it wherever you happen to listen to podcasts, because that really helps me grow the audience and grow the platform and bring in more people who, like all of us, are interested in improving the way we care for people at the end of life. So until we come together next week, remember we're here for love. So face your fear, be ready for whatever happens next, and love each and every moment of this precious life. Bye-bye.